What is going on, everybody, and welcome into a Wednesday, June 29th edition of the Unreasonable Odds podcast presented by DraftKings, Sportsbook. We are in the dog days of summer. Basketball is done. Hockey is done. I put out a baseball loser yesterday, pretty standard there. But what we do have is football around the corner. And, we got the holiday weekend creeping up, July 4th. It's never too early to start breaking down futures. And we're going to start actually this year. We will have plenty of NFL content for you, don't worry. But we're going to start this year on the college football side of things. College football starts earlier, obviously, by a few weeks than the NFL. And I think we've got a pretty interesting board this year. So to do so, we're bringing in guests per usual. Tyler Wyatt, you can find him on Twitter at BetSmartUS. Is that right, Tyler? I just had it in front of me and I lost it, which is silly of me.
You nailed it. Home run.
All right, BetSmartUS.
We need more home runs. Everyone's having a bad June, I feel like. So don't feel like you're out there on Julian Island.
I'm always on Julian Island. I need to go to Julian Island for a week and just stay away from some games now that basketball's over. That's what I need to do. All right. So far, the two power conferences that I would say I've looked into the most would be the SEC and the ACC. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. We'll be back later in the summer and kind of focus maybe more on some of the other conferences. And we'll sprinkle in some of the other power stuff today, but let's start in the ACC actually, because for some reason, I keep looking through all these college football magazines. I keep going through the schedule. I keep going through look ahead lines. I keep going through win totals and futures and whatnot. And for some reason, I keep getting brought into all these bets on the ACC, which is weird for me because I'm a big SEC guy, or I'll wind up in some of the other power conferences and sprinkle in some of the lesser conferences and not pay much attention to the ACC. But here I am, very interested in teams like Pitt, very interested in teams like NC State, and very interested in going against teams like UNC. Let's start at the top, I guess, which would be Clemson. Wildly disappointing last season, not looking that much different this season. Poor quarterback play, I think, losing some coordinators that are important there to Dabo. I'm not going under Clemson's win total or anything. If you made me play it, I would go under because I think they definitely have a couple of losable games. I'm just more inclined to look at a team like NC State that we'll touch on later and take the long odds there on a team like NC State to win the conference. Take the 10 points with a team like NC State when those two teams play, even though I think it's a revenge spot that Clemson should win, but double digits is a lot there. Tyler, any takes on Clemson here for you in terms of bets, or is it a stay away spot kind of like it is for me?
It's pretty bad that after a 10-3 season, we're talking about Clemson like they're just buried and gone and forgotten about.
Yep.
I do agree that I don't think that they're going to be the Clemson that we've seen 4, 5, 6 years over the past 4, 5, 6 years. I think last year was an outlier, but I do not think that they're a 11-win college football playoff team this year. They're going to be favored a whole bunch. Outside of Notre Dame, I don't think right now that they're at least a considerable underdog in any matchup. You could look at Wake and NC State there in back-to-back weeks.
I was going to say, if you think they're going to lose that Notre Dame game, it's pretty easy to say that they maybe split those back-to-back Wake NC State games.
Yeah, and that puts them at 10-2, which, most teams are going to be happy with. Clemson fans, probably not. They're not at 10-2. They're not going to playoff. I wouldn't think, unless there was just unless college football season was wrecked this year. But yeah, I look at Clemson and see 9 or 10 wins, and I don't see them going through that ceiling of 10. If injury, if it happened like that, you're talking about a team that could easily lose 3 or 4 times, and their win total's nowhere in jeopardy of. But yeah, when I look at Clemson, just not a team that I have a lot of faith in.
All right, so it seems like we're on the same page there. let's go down. I mean, let's just go right to NC State because that's the team that has my eye. They were very good last season. Lose the O lineman as a top 10 pick, but they bring back a ton of starters on offense. I think they bring back 7. Not their leading receiver, but their next 2 leading receivers. They have a legit quarterback, maybe the best quarterback in the conference. We'll see. And they bring back, I think, all but one starters on defense. That's what you have, right, Tyler? They bring back 10 of
Yeah,
11 defensive starters.
yeah, almost 90% of their production. They don't lose much at all on defense.
Yeah, and they were a
Right.
really good defensive team last season. So that's going to be the backbone of this team, and then we'll see what the offense can do with really good quarterback play. For me, this one, I already wrote this one up on DK Playbook, put an article out. It's juicy, but I don't mind laying juice on win totals when you have the good number. Like, I feel like this could close 9, and it's at 8.5 minus 150 on DK. There's a lot worse prices out there than the minus 150. I don't see how this team doesn't get to 9. And if we do wind up offering markets to win 10 games on teams, which I'm working on that with our traders. I'm trying to open up some more college football markets, getting them at good plus money to win 10 games, 10 or more games, I should say, is very intriguing to me. We mentioned the Clemson spot. It's going to be tough for them to win that game at Clemson after what happened last year. I hope they do. If they don't, I'll take the 10 points anyway. But outside of that game, there's a few coin flips towards the end of the season, and they have a Texas Tech game in there earlier. Let's just say they split the coin flips, which is there's 4 of those. So let's say they lose 2 and lose to Clemson. You're still already getting to 9.
Yeah, similar conversation as Clemson. And Clemson is the team right now. I look at that they're an underdog too. At Louisville, at UNC to end the season, back-to-back road trips there, where they'll be small road favorites, somewhere in the field goal range right now. Obviously, a lot can change between now and Thanksgiving. But when I look at the schedule, it sits up about as well as possible. Average opponent rating right now in my power rankings is 66. They have a Charleston Southern team that kind of skews that. They're a really bad FCS team. If you take the Charleston Southern out of the equation, they're still playing teams that are around 60. Outside of Clemson, they don't face a team that's inside my top 25. Wake Forest, you could make an argument that they're low in my power ratings. A schedule that's all that tough. You mentioned Devin Leary, one of the better quarterbacks in the conference, and I think a guy that could be a first-round pick in next year's draft. Defense returns absolutely almost everybody. So it's a great team. I think right now have a very low number. Surprise me at all if they were to win 10 games, but I think 9 wins is absolutely reasonable. Absolutely love over in NC State.
Yep, we're on the same page there, and I have that. We'll get to UNC next because that's a team that I'm not very high on. But that game against UNC, I think the look ahead is Wolfpack -4. It's the last game of the regular season, and it's on the road for the Wolfpack. But give me NC State in that game. So let's transition right into UNC, who they were ranked, I believe, 10 going into last season. After the huge year they had with Sam Howell, we saw the value of losing all those weapons and all those ball carriers to that offense, and they completely fell apart. Now they lose Howell and don't gain much. I mean, they keep their top receiver, but who's going to be throwing him the ball? And then outside of that, there's not much improvement anywhere. So as of June 29th, when we record this, I have my NC State article out. I have my UNC article out on the under 7.5 wins there. Key number. Again, we're playing some juice here, which I don't mind on these win totals at -135. Other shops are showing you 6.5s on UNC, which is what I think the number should be, because I think they're going to win 6 or 7 games. Probably 7, but 6 or 7. I love the under 7.5. I don't see how this team loses more pieces a year after going downhill and somehow gets to 8-4 in the ACC. And with that schedule, I'm already looking ahead to like they play Florida A&M in a warm-up game, which obviously they're going to win. Then the next week they go on the road to App State. That's App State's first game. So App State's all in on preparing for UNC there, whereas UNC has something to look ahead to, even though it's a team they're going to steamroll. App State is a home dog +3 there. Like, I already like that spot. I already told you I'm going to go against NC State or against UNC and play NC State in that final game of the year on a look ahead line, I think. And then the look ahead line, Pittsburgh is a 1-point dog at UNC. And I like this Pittsburgh team. That's another spot I'm going to go against UNC. I don't know how they get there, looking at the games that they should absolutely lose, and then some of these coin flip games, given the pieces they lose. Tyler, I know that you're kind of with me and you would play an under on 7.5, but can you play devil's advocate at all and say, like, what am I missing? Why am I'm convinced UNC is just not going to get anywhere close to this 7.5.
Gene Chizik should help. That defense was just awful last season. They were really bad on the road. At home, they were really good, 6-1, but they couldn't find a way to win outside of the state of North Carolina. Yep. When I look at the schedule, to play devil's advocate, Notre Dame, I think, is a clear loss. Miami, you mentioned Pitt. I make that number Pitt -4 about 3 weeks ago. I see that. I mean, I see a Pitt team that's going to win that game. You could make a case that Virginia and then the rivalry game are both going to be coin flips. But when I look at the schedule, I only see 4 wins on paper.
That's what I'm saying.
So, to play devil's advocate, they're going to have to win a tough game in Boone. Appalachian State, you mentioned, it's their opener. They're going to be fired up. At Georgia State, not a team that is going to expect. They have the upset win over a couple years ago. They're not going to be an easy out. So they play back-to-back road games there, and then they get Notre Dame. If they were to lose to App State and then go back and play Notre Dame at home, you're talking about a team that could be very easily 2-2 through 4 games. If that's the case, I think it's panic mode. And then, then you're talking about a team that may struggle to get to a bowl game, much less, 7 or 8 wins. There are a lot of coin flips. If they were to win 3 out of the 5 coin flips that I have on there, I consider, at Miami is a tough game. I made that number 5. Miami should win that game. They're going to beat Duke. Virginia is not very good, and Georgia be terrible. But they could absolutely fall to any one of those teams too. And we could look back to last season and see that they beat some quality teams and they lost to some trash teams. Jekyll and Hyde team, if I've ever seen one. I do think Gene Chizik will help that defense immensely. You mentioned the offense. They have a number of weapons. Josh Downs really good.
So they have the receiver in place, but what are they going to have at quarterback? Because the defense takes a step forward. I see the offense taking a step backwards. How can you not have your quarterback goes to the NFL? How can you not take a step backwards?
I do agree there. And that's probably the reason that we see a North Carolina team that was about like last year. They're going to be better on defense. They're going to regress on offense. And it's probably a wash in terms of, the end of the season. But when I look at North Carolina team, I see a 7-win type of team, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if they were to go 500. I guess you could make the case that they could. They would have to win. It probably comes down to NC State. Honestly, when I look at this schedule, I see it's a team that's probably in the 6-5 range going into NC State, and they've got to win a really tough game against a rival to maybe get that 7th win. If they're
6-5, then we won.
We cashed. Yeah.
They can do. I mean, I'll be mad because I'm going to have NC State in that game, and I want to win my bet on the game. But the win total is going to cash. So We're talking about needing a team that's 7-4 going into that NC State game. And even if we're there, I still like where we are because I like NC State in that game. If it comes down to it, I hope they're 6-5 going into that game. But even if they're 7-4, I'm going to be going into that game saying I still think we got this.
Yeah, in Miami, Pitt, and Wake Forest are all 4 losses I have marked down. It's easy, the season out on paper, but I have those almost etched in stone right now. I just don't see a North Carolina team that can beat either of those 4, and I think they lose to NC State. That's 5 losses right there. obviously it's pretty easy to run it off and play the season, but it's just a team. Team that I think Mac Brown, long term, I just don't see Mac Brown an ACC championship and doing, he's had a couple of good teams since coming back there. It's just not a team that I have a whole lot of excitement about going into this season.
I'm not sure that Pitt UNC line is up on DK Sportsbook right now. It was, and I'm sure we'll bring it back. October 29th, that game is, but that game is floating around to pick 'em. And yeah, I'm going to be all over Pitt there. So let's transition to Pitt, who obviously very good last year, but now you lose a quarterback, first round NFL draft pick. Your number one wide receiver transfers away to USC. How are they still going to be good? But you get Slovis, the quarterback transfer from USC, back. It's almost like a college football trade. And there's still pieces there for Pitt. I haven't dove into Phil Steele's magazine yet, as I do each year. And we're hoping to have Phil back. He was a guest last year on Unreasonable Odds. We're hoping to have him back in July. We're working on that. But what I do know is this. Phil Steele has the Pitt Panthers as his number one surprise team for the 2022 season. They're going to be pretty good. They're set at 8.5, overs -120 on DK Sportsbook. I'm working on some alternate win total markets. I would love to get a juicy, if you haven't picked up by now on this podcast, I don't mind laying the juice to get that extra win. I think it's smart. Right. So I'll lay a juicy 7.5 if we can get that up on DK Sportsbook. I know that you have Pitt favored in almost every game of the season. Now there's a handful of coin flips in there, and some are going to go the wrong way. But talk to me about why you like this Pitt Panther team so much yet again, even after all the turnover.
Schedule's pretty trash. So if you're a Pitt fan,
perfect.
I think, there's a lot of winnable football games on there. The first two games are pretty tough, West Virginia and then Tennessee. Familiar with the Vols from last season. They got a win in Knoxville, so I think there should be some confidence there. You mentioned Kenny Pickett. It's really hard to just right up where you left off and go and sling the ball around. I love Keaton Slovis in this offense.
Yeah,
I think it'll be a little different fit in this versus playing in the Pac-12, but I think weapons. They return 8 on offense, and when I say that they return 8, if you lose a quarterback like Pickett and you bring in a guy like Slovis, consider that necessarily it's more of a wash in production. I count what Slovis was able to do in USC, and you're bringing in a guy that that was able to prove that he's a solid quarterback.
Yep.
He's got a freshman All-American receiver from Akron that transferred in. Kid's going to be really good. He's not Jordan Addison. I mean, Jordan Addison's a first round type of NFL talent. He's a guy that can go in and probably play in the league almost right away.
Yep.
But the schedule sets up brilliantly if you're a Pitt fan. Tennessee might be a big game because it's early in the season. But when I look at the schedule,
at home, at least it's at home.
And it's at home. You have a Pitt team that, if they lose to Tennessee, is still going to be 5-1 going into 2 road games against Louisville and then against the North Carolina team that we've already talked about. We don't have a whole lot of respect for. Louisville, yep. I'm not sold that Satterfield makes it out of the season as a head coach. He didn't seem like he wanted to be there at the end of last season. They didn't seem like they wanted to bring him back. They had a change in athletic. The athletic director there is just a couple of jobs, so he's not his guy. It's a Louisville team I don't have a lot of respect for, and we can talk about them later. But I just look at the schedule and see Tennessee being the only loss heading into maybe a game against North Carolina. And at that point, you're talking about a team that's almost got to the win total, and you're still talking about 3 or 4 weeks left in the season.
So this is going to be, you just look at the schedule and this is going to be a fast start. And if it's not, it's a huge problem for Pitt. 5 of their first 6 games are at home, and they're going to be double-digit favorites in at least 3 of those games, maybe even in a road game at Western Michigan. We'll see.
Probably at Western Michigan too. Yeah, I have Western Michigan's a little higher up in my model, but they're absolutely going to be close to a double-digit favorite in 5.
Yeah,
first 6.
So now you face the problem of playing 4 of the last 6 on the road in conference. Do they come undone down the stretch? I think if you just bet the Pitt over, you're going to be in such good position that if you need to down the stretch, you can fade them in a couple individual games to try and hedge yourself a little bit there if you're worried. But again, some of those road games, like you just said, Louisville and UNC, like tough back-to-back road games in conference, I guess, but in theory, they should win both of those games. They're the better team in both of those games, in my mind. As our producer, Samir, who is a Pitt grad and is loving hearing this text, says that Western Michigan is a revenge game. Did they loot? They lost to Western Michigan
They
last
lost,
year?
ugly game last
At home, huh? I kind of remember that. I do remember that. Okay. I forgot about that. And we also have my Rhode Island Rams on the schedule. I don't know what I'm looking at your number here on this game as 39. Samir and I will have to make a friendly wager on that game. I'll be backing the Rhody Rams plus 40 for lunch or something. That'll be fun. Hang on to your hat. Let's really quick before we go into some other teams, because we've already talked about all of my favorite teams and my one not favorite team in this conference. I'm going to bring up the DK Sportsbook odds to win the conference. Clemson is minus 130, which Clemson should obviously be favored. I think they're a little too heavily favored, though, at that number, as they were last year. You look through the rest of this conference, like who is the team that you think is worth taking a stab on? When I did my NC State article on over 8.5 wins, I included just a quarter unit size play on NC State plus 1,000 to win the ACC. Now they're on Clemson's side of things, so they have to either win the game at Clemson or finish with a better record than Clemson. But at 10-1, I think that's worth a sprinkle. And if I was playing a second team, it would be Pitt plus 900 on the other side. Are those the teams for you, or do you see anything deeper? 2,000 on Wake Forest is out there as well.
I've got Wake projected to win 10 games. They would be the only other flyer. Well, it's Clemson, Wake, or NC State for me. Pitt on the other side in the Coastal. Wake schedule sets up pretty easy. It's they play Clemson and NC State. Outside of that, I think they're favorites in every game. Is there any value in Wake? I'm not sure. Is there any value in? I don't think so. Pitt would be the team that I look at least in terms of value, to win the conference. There's going to be a lot of money bet on Clemson. But I think Pitt, out of the 4, is the one, at least from a value standpoint, brings the most to the table.
The good thing about Pitt, like, let's say Pitt and NC State are comparable teams at the end of the season. Let's say they both go over those 8.5 win totals and go 9-3. NC State still has to get through the Clemson side of things, whereas Pittsburgh just has to get through Miami. So
right.
If you're thinking about it that way, and one's plus 900 and one's plus 1,000, probably taking the plus 900 on the side where you don't have to deal with Clemson to play in the game is probably the smarter bet. Which because you're bet smart. Get it?
We don't always make smart bets, but
yeah.
The
smart. You got to make smart bets.
Yeah, the path to the championship is just for Pitt. Whether it's Clemson, Wake, or NC State out of the Atlantic Division, it's just a tougher road to get there, in my opinion. Not to say that either of those 3 teams won't beat in the championship game. I just think Pitt can get there and get there a whole lot easier than either of the other 3.
All right. Any other strong takes from you in the ACC that you feel the need to give before we move on to the SEC? Saying no is fine.
No.
All right.
There's just a whole lot of really good teams in the ACC.
Yep. All right. SEC time. I don't know if you know this about me, Tyler. I'm a huge Bama guy. I did not go to Bama. They've just made me some money throughout the years, and I enjoy watching them steamroll teams, particularly on the first half spread. I played some Bama when we opened it up at minus 120, I think, to win the SEC. They're now minus 135 on DK Sportsbook. DraftKings Sportsbook gave a very generous, I believe, minus 180 or minus 190 on the over 10.5 wins. I'll say this for the fifth time. I don't mind laying some juice on the win total if it's the wrong number, and I feel like this has to be 11. This team's not losing 2 games. You could push on 11 for sure. Alabama's not going 10-2. So I don't care about the juice on 10.5. That's fine. Personally, I don't think they're going to lose a game because the hardest game that they have, the only game that they might not be a double-digit favorite, even though they probably will be a double-digit favorite, is the Texas A&M game. But what is the Texas A&M game? It is going to be a home, probably Saturday night game in a revenge spot for their only regular season loss last season, and they're going to come out guns blazing in that game. I cannot wait to bet Alabama first half in that game. We'll start at the top with Bama. Do you think is it 11 or 12? How many do they win, and do you think that they win it all?
I think it's 12. And I live in SEC country. Most of the year I'm in Knoxville, and I spend a fair amount of time in Texas. They're not going to beat Texas on the road, not this year, not next year, and probably not any year that Texas is in the SEC. And then you just have a bunch of teams that they're going to be favored over, by 3, 4, 5 touchdowns. A&M is the only game that I have circled as far as a spot. You mentioned revenge.
But when it comes to the actual spot, I know that's the closest opponent, but once we get there in that moment, and if you play spots, we just talked about the revenge pit in Western Michigan. Like, I'm all about Bama in this game at the shortest number we'll see all season.
A&M's the only game that I have circled. And you mentioned revenge game. There are maybe a handful of coaches in college football that care about revenge games. Nick Saban is absolutely that guy. If he loses to you because he loses, so he's losing, first of all. If he does, it leaves such a bad taste in his mouth that he wants to embarrass you the next time that he gets to see you. And I see that against A&M this year. That number you mentioned will be probably around 9 or 10, somewhere in that neighborhood. Wouldn't surprise me at all if this is a 4-touchdown blowout. A&M's a good team, talented team. They're not as talented as Alabama. You could talk about Texas A&M recruiting and what's going on there. They have a lot of talent. They don't have beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa talent. After there, you go to Tennessee. It's a talented offense, but I don't have any fear that they drop a game in Knoxville. Mississippi State at LSU. Are they going to lose to Brian Kelly in year one at LSU? No, absolutely not. Is Lane Kiffin going to beat Nick Saban in Oxford? No. And then Auburn is, Brian Harsin is probably coaching for his job this season, and I don't have a lot of faith in Auburn to do a whole lot. I just do not see a game outside of A&M where they're going to be any threat to lose. And you mentioned 10.5 being a number, even, with the high juice. I think they win. There's absolutely zero chance in my mind they lose 2. So absolutely 10.5 over is home run.
I'm all about that. I think that they do win the 12, but you give yourself room for that one slip up. But once they lose, if they lose once, they're not going to lose again. Saban was able to accomplish that last year, all the way up until the national championship game, including the SEC championship game against Georgia, winning as underdogs. There's no way he doesn't accomplish that this year if they do win a game to get them through without losing another. So I think I think I put it out on Twitter at -190. We're at -240 now on DraftKings Sportsbook. I don't know if I've ever given out anything as high as -240. But if you're listening to this now and you didn't bet it earlier, it's all about putting the money down. Do you mind your money being held, through the end of November, through Thanksgiving, to collect on Alabama over 10.5, because that ticket is cashing.
I wouldn't be Alabama over 11. If you could find an alternate,
I mean, we have to get there at some point. I feel like once the juice gets to a certain point, I feel like we have to move it to 11. We'll see.
Yeah, 10.5 better, obviously, because you don't push with a loss. It's just a schedule that sets up for them beautifully, and I don't think that barring an injury, it would take an injury at quarterback, and even then, they're still probably going to be fine. I mean, I know. That's the when you're talking about Alabama, they can afford to lose guys that other teams can't. So even injury, no real chance to me, there's just not a chance that they lose 2. It's 11-1, I think, is absolute worst case scenario. But prop bet. If I can find anyone on Twitter that wants to bet Alabama, 12-0, let me know because it's probably close to even money, but I'll take it.
Yes. So tell me this then. Here's my only question or concern. So they have Young back, which is fantastic, the Heisman Trophy winner. They lose two very good receivers to the NFL. How do they make up the pass catching? Are you comfortable with the guys stepping in to catch these passes from Young? Because they didn't look good when they went down in the national title game, but how are you going to beat Georgia with those receivers going down the way things were last year? The kid stepping in didn't look good. They have the whole offseason. I assume they're going to look better, and then they bring more in. How do you feel about Alabama's pass catchers?
It's just going to be next guy up. Whether you cover Alabama on a day-to-day basis, you probably those guys. If you're outside of the SEC footprint, games, are they going to be as high-powered as last year? Maybe not. I think the defense is going to be brilliant. I think it's going to be one of his better defenses in the last couple of years. But I think it's just next up as far as who the receivers are. It doesn't matter.
So, Tyler, we cut out again. You want to just start that one over?
Yeah.
Whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
For Alabama, it's just going to be next guy up. It doesn't matter the name on the jersey. I trust Young. Obviously, Heisman winner. You don't have to spend much time there. But the defense is going to be so good that even if the offense were to take a step back or a half step back, the defense is going to put them in position to win absolutely every regular season game and any other game that they were to play.
So I assume you like them to win the SEC, both regular season and SEC championship game.
Yeah, I think Georgia would be the game that would scare me, but I think season particularly, I think Alabama and Georgia. Alabama, I would give the edge to. Last season, it's a Georgia team that that loses quite a bit. I don't trust Stetson to keep playing at the level that he played at. I'm not sure what level he played at. He played brilliantly in some big games, but he wasn't asked to do a whole lot. It's a Georgia defense that loses a ton. It's next guy up for them, like Alabama on the offense. But I think Alabama about a half step in front of where Georgia is. Alabama, Georgia, lock that in for SEC championship. I think that's, but I give Alabama, the lean in that one.
Yep. All right. Is there anything else on the SEC West side of things for Alabama before we get to Georgia in the East that you think is worth talking about? Because I'm just going to ride the coattails of Alabama this season.
LSU's an interesting one.
Uh-huh.
I do like Brian Kelly as a coach. I don't like him as a human being. That's a whole other story. But it's an LSU. Agree. Yeah, I mean, it's an LSU team that I haven't checked Kings win total for them in the last day or so.
6.5. I think it's a little juiced towards the over.
Yeah, and when I look at LSU,
7-win team, right? That feels right.
Absolutely. And when I look at their schedule, they're going to start out 4-0 because they play. Florida State will be, if they win Florida State, they're 4-0 going to Auburn, and then they have a couple of games there: Auburn, Tennessee, and Florida. If they were to go 1-2 there, they're at 5 wins, and then you have 3. You've got Mississippi, Alabama,
you got to go
Arkansas, but you have a UAB team if you have a UAB team, if you split those 3, that gets you to 6 wins. All you have to do is win, one of the last or one other, I guess 2 of the last 5 to get you over that number. I trust Brian Kelly to outcoach most of the teams in the SEC West. Lane Kiffin, brilliant offensive mind. Arkansas, I don't have a whole lot of faith in. I think Brian Kelly can outcoach everyone not named Nick Saban if he has the personnel. Doesn't quite have the personnel yet, but I think he has enough players on there to get to a 7-5 type of record.
It's fair. And I'll say this, now that I'm looking at this, I see that you have your number LSU -5 in that opener against Florida State, which is, I'm using air quotes here, neutral. That's in New Orleans. So LSU -2.5, I think, in that opener looks very good to me. And it's everyone's going to be betting it because it is the Sunday night football game of that
Yeah.
Labor Day weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So it's after that big Saturday slate, and you want to watch that Sunday night game. This is one that I would get on early, I think, because I think it closes, more like 4 or whatever. So if you want an early week 1 play for that Labor Day weekend, when you're getting to Sunday night and being like, ooh, now I want to bet this game after watching that full Saturday of action, do yourself a favor, do it now and get the good number.
Yeah, there's no way that number stays at 2.5 in late August or September. I think it's well over a field goal. I made the number 5 thinking that 5 might even be low. But yeah, 2.5 I think is a steal there.
I hope you're right. All right, so there's a week 1 play for you. On the other side of things, Georgia intrigues me because, I want to fade them in some way, but the only way that I can find to do it, because they're still good enough and there's nothing really in their path in the SEC East, the only way to do it is by taking Alabama to win the SEC, because I think even after upsetting Georgia last year, I think Alabama's going to get it again. Because I'll back anything Alabama that you throw in front of me, but I'm like, is it worth taking any plus money on a Georgia under? I don't like the most they can lose is 1 game, just 1 slip up somewhere in there. Schedule wise, I just don't see it. I don't think Georgia's going to be nearly as good as it was last year. And I think we'll see that when they have to play the big dogs eventually, the Alabamas and whoever else they may stumble upon in the college football playoff, which I assume they're going to make. You can tell me if you disagree with me. Is there anything in Georgia's way? And even if you don't think they stumble, is there a team maybe that you think is worth taking the points with against them at any stage in the season? What got in here for Georgia?
Tennessee would be the only team, and that's because the number is what it is. I think right now, I haven't checked DraftKings lately. It was 15.5, 16 range. I think
What's the date on that game? Do you have that?
It is November 5th.
November 5th. All right, hold on. Let me see.
I know it opened around 15. I hadn't seen if it's moved at all. It's a Tennessee team that will have a dangerous offense and an offense that can put up points against a Georgia defense that only returns 3 starters.
15.5 right now on DK Sportsbook.
Yeah, I think Tennessee is the right side there just because the offense is going to be so good. Georgia returns 3 guys defense, but it's next guy up. It's going to be 4 and 5-star guys on the field. Talent's not going to be a drop off there. Tennessee is the only one that I look at that I think they're in any danger of maybe slipping up. Oregon to start the season because it's early, but what do we know about Oregon with Cristobal gone? And they probably still have left. I hadn't checked their transfer portal to know. Not a lot of time invested in Oregon. When I look at Georgia's schedule, they're going to be considerable favorites over everyone on the schedule. And outside of Tennessee, is Kentucky going to beat Georgia at home? I don't think so. We talked about Auburn being down, Florida year 1. I mean, it's just a schedule I think that's, that sets up pretty well for Georgia. If they were to lose to Tennessee, I don't trust Tennessee to go. I guess they would have to go 11-1 to be in a tiebreaker with Georgia to make it out of the East. I just think it's, Georgia's pretty locked in a matchup with Alabama and Atlanta.
I'm with you. Anything else in that division? It sounds like Tennessee is a team worth backing. They're kind of getting some hype. Anything Tennessee related or other teams in the East that catches your eye as something that stands out?
Tennessee, the over on 7.5. I think you guys had them 7.5 in that 135, 140 range. Pittsburgh is the key game. I think they're going to be favored over everyone other than Alabama and Georgia. I have LSU a small favorite at home because Tennessee travels to Baton Rouge to play that one. But if you're talking about Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and Pitt being the 4 danger games for Tennessee, then you're talking about a team 8-4 is good to go over. If they were to beat Pitt to start the season, you're talking about a 9-win team. I don't see it. A team like Kentucky's just not been able to beat Tennessee, and outside of Georgia and Alabama, I don't have any real fear of Missouri or South Carolina beating them. I think Tennessee over 7.5. I love that play just because I think there might be 8 wins just because the schedule's. If they beat Pitt, it's a 9-3 football team. If they lose to Pitt, I think they're an 8-4 team, and both of those are good enough to get over that 7.5.
Both of those are good enough. Okay, let's roll on to some other conferences here and just do some quick hits because we used up most of our time here in the SEC and the ACC. I'm going to bring up the only team that I think is a real threat to beat Alabama in a national title game, and for me, that's Ohio State. And we need to see what their defense is going to be because they could have some problems defensively. What I do know is that CJ Stroud throwing to those two, you had two top 11 picks, whatever it was, at wide receiver position go in the NFL draft. They didn't even play in that bowl game against Utah, and the two receivers that they threw out there were ridiculously good, and they're only going to be better, and the quarterback's only going to be better. Ohio State's another team that I think has the potential to run the table, and they're a team that I think will win the Big Ten. They're a team that you seem pretty high on Notre Dame. I would consider, I don't know what you have the number on that opening game at. I'm very tempted to lay the points with Ohio State, but I don't think I'm going to. What I think I'm going to do instead is play the over on a team total on Ohio State in week 1, because I think that offense is just going to be ridiculous. Tell me how you feel about Ohio State, and if you disagree with me on them being the second best team behind Alabama, who do you think that is?
After seeing Ohio State last season, it's really hard to go. Big Ten, I think, is better this year than they were last season. My only concern with Ohio State would be on the defense, just because they lose quite a bit. They return 5 guys. The linebacker area would be a bit of concern, but it's, they're in the conversation with Georgia and Alabama. It's which 4 or 5 star do we, name the starter. They play so many games typically in blowout fashion that they get a lot of guys on the field that you may not know their name because they're freshmen or sophomores and it's in a 4th. But they have guys that have seen the field. So it's not like these kids are going to be thrown out there, to the wolves in, their first college football season. That offense is just going to be so good. They have probably the best receiver in all football and a kid who could be playing on an NFL team right now as a junior in Jackson Smith. Trayvon, Henderson is back at running back. You mentioned Stroud. He's going to be in the Heisman conversation. It's an Ohio State team that, 10 wins, I think, is the floor. And, it comes down to probably at Penn State or the finale with Michigan, maybe to determine, the pecking order. But, I think the pecking order for at least Ohio State's conversation is, are they 2nd, 3rd, or 4th in the playoff? It's not, what other bowl game do they go to? I love Ohio State. I think they're rightfully, they're in that conversation with Georgia and Alabama in terms of teams that are going to win the title. Outside of those 3, I think there's a pretty good gap. It used to be Clemson was always in there with, the 4 with those 3. I think it's Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State. And then it's a decent step before you get to another team that, that's realistic conversation.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I think so. Yeah, I think what you said makes me feel better about going with things like team totals for Ohio State rather than laying big numbers with them early in the season.
I made Ohio State 6. Dame.
You made so your number on that game is 6.
Yeah, Ohio State would be 6. So I give Ohio State 2.5 point edge at home. Notre Dame 2.5. So basically, move it 2.5 to where the game's being played. But yeah, I think it's a 6-point neutral field, Ohio State.
So you're going to be on Notre Dame 14.5.
Absolutely.
In that. Okay.
We're locked in there. Part of that's because of when it's played. I think a game like that earlier in the season, I feel more comfortable taking a number like that because I think the money is going to, at least before kickoff, the money will come in on Notre Dame. You probably get as the number moves, it wouldn't surprise me an awful lot of Ohio State money comes in, but I think that's once you get under that threshold, 14, if you get to 13 or 13.5. But if you can give me 2 touchdowns and a half against a Notre Dame team that I think is worthy of being in that top 10 conversation, I'll take 2+ touchdowns there and ride.
All right, so we're moving all over the place now. Talk to me about this Notre Dame team. I think their win total is set at 8.5. Um, I bet Notre Dame in that bowl game where they puked all over themselves, and I'm not a Notre Dame guy. I don't like backing them with or without Brian Kelly. Um, where do you see them? Where do you see them landing this season? You said a top 10 team, which they'll open. I could see them flirting with becoming that fourth team behind the top three that we discussed, and I could see them just coming undone and being at the bottom of that top 25. Where do you kind of peg them in there?
I think they're probably a year away before we talk about them being in playoff conversation or in that. Ohio State obviously be a tough game. Marshall, I'm not really concerned about that. Cal, they get North Carolina. The schedule sets up really, really well for them. They do play Clemson in early November. We talked about Clemson and, kind of where they are. I think those are two pretty evenly matched teams as far as that goes. USC, do I have concerns that Notre Dame might fall in Los Angeles there? When I look at the schedule, there's probably 4 games I have circled. That's Ohio State, Clemson, USC, and that's probably it. In terms of, so there's really only 3 that I see Notre Dame slipping up. If they go 2-1 there, if the loss is to Ohio State, they're a playoff team. If they go 1-2, it's probably depends on what some other teams do. If they lose all 3 of those, it's a Notre Dame in a New Year's Bowl, and it's
Puking all over themselves once again.
Yeah, kind of something we're used to with Brian Kelly. I'm not sure that that Notre Dame fans are going to love that, but
maybe the bowl game will be against LSU if they get that 7th. If they get 7 wins, there's a good one.
How great would
that? I would watch that. I don't know who I would root for, but I would watch it.
Yeah.
All right, 2 power conferences left. I'll give you a team in each of them. Let's start with the Big 12. Last year's champ, Baylor. I like Baylor a lot this year. Their win total is sitting at 7.5 on DraftKings Sportsbook. I think this is going to be an 8-9 win team. I don't see 7-5 in there. So I'm kind of springing this one on you. I don't know what kind of research you have here, what numbers you have here, but if we're talking Big 12, Baylor is the team for me. I like their over 7.5. I don't know how you feel about that, or if anything, any one team jumps out to you in the Big 12 to either back or fade your favorite kind of Big 12 bet.
Yeah, out of the Big 12, it's Oklahoma State or Baylor for me. I don't trust Oklahoma. It's a Baylor team. The schedule sets up at non-conference. They should go undefeated. BYU might be a tough out. I just don't have a lot of faith in anyone in the Big 12 not named Oklahoma State. Oklahoma, whatever. No faith there in year one. But Baylor at 6-1. I think there's, if I was going to play a future out of the Big 12, it would be Baylor, just because of what they were able to do last season. I think, it's a team that's in that 10, 9-10 win conversation.
Baylor plus 600 to win the Big 12 on DK Sportsbook. I like that. I like the Baylor over. I sense an article coming on the DK Playbook very soon, writing up Baylor. Pac-12. I was a big Utah guy last year. When they lost those 2 early games, I got very nervous. They needed to win out at one point to get the over on their win total, and they did it. They beat up on Oregon twice, and I was all over them against Ohio State in that bowl game, covered. I really wish they would have won that game because I was all over the money line as well. I like what they have coming into this year. I like who they're bringing back. Cam Rising, the rest of that offense. They have a good defense. They lost some linebackers. They should be able to make it up. Utah's at 9 wins on DK Sportsbook, plus 250 or 260 to win the Pac-12. I played them early. I played some over 8.5s. I got some plus 400 to win the 12. I think that USC is going to be good, but I think Utah is my team in the Pac-12 this year. Agree or disagree, Tyler? And what else catches your eye in the Pac-12? I guess.
Agree. I think they win their side of the division, and then it's can they win the Pac-12 championship? That'll be, that's the question. I
I'll
think
take him
their
at big plus
season,
money in that game.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And we will have divisions open on DraftKings Sportsbook at some point. So if you want to just bet that side, you can bet that side.
At Florida, the opener, as far as their season win total, is the game I think that could be big. And that big in the difference between are they a 10-win team or are they an 11-win team? Schedule sets up beautifully. If they beat Florida, would not surprise me at all if this is a double-digit Utah win team. They return 8 on offense. Defense returns 5, but their defense is really good. I love Whittingham. I think he's one of the most underrated coaches in all of football. That Florida opener is a coin flip. If they win there at Arizona State, are they going? I mean, where do they slip up? Is my question. You mentioned USC on October 15th. If they beat Florida and they beat USC, this is a team that at that point in the season should be inside the top 10 probably. And, coming down the line there with a couple of road games at Colorado and Oregon to close out the season. I mean, I don't want to say that Utah is maybe I am going to say it. Is Utah a sneaky
that
playoff team? Could they be that one, the disruptor out of the Pac-12 that in November, are we talking about is a 11-0 Utah with one game to play, who's 5th in this college football playoff standings? Are they going to make that jump to 4 if they win at Colorado in their finale? And then, I hope so. Out of the Pac-12, that's, they're the easiest team to root for me. I'm anti-USC, I'm anti-Oregon. So, put me down for Utah. I love the Utes.
Yeah, we're seeing 2 eye to eye here, because that's my team in the Pac-12, and if and when we throw yes, no to make college football playoff bets up on DK Sportsbook, I'll put up a yes on a huge number. Obviously, we're talking small play here, but I'll play a yes on a Utah and see where that goes. You mentioned that first game against Florida. I love that first game against Florida. It's tough because it's on the road at the Swamp. That is kind of tough. But I don't like Florida this year, and I think getting them early is helpful. Especially against like a more veteran team, I guess, like Utah, even though they did lose some bodies on defense. I played plus 1.5 when it opened on Utah there, and we're looking at -2 on DK Sportsbook, which I still don't mind. I'm all about Utah in that game. I'm about Utah in the futures market. That, along with some of those ACC teams we talked about at the top, are some of my favorites. Before we get out of here, and we've thrown plenty at you guys listening in terms of bets for week 1, for look ahead lines, for win totals. We'll just go out of the power conferences here. And I know, Tyler, you got one team you want to talk about quick, and I think I know where you're going with it, and I think I agree.
Yeah, Cincinnati. Obviously, losing Desmond Ridder is tough, but they've got 2 studs at quarterback. Ben Bryant, who was a Cincinnati commit, he's back. And then you've got Evan Prater, highly touted 4-star quarterback who's in. Is there going to be regression at quarterback? Desmond Ridder was, all-time Cincinnati great.
Yep.
But it's a schedule that sets up. They open with Arkansas right now. I made that number 2. It's higher than 2 Arkansas touchdown. I hadn't checked DraftKings lately, but was around a touchdown.
Yeah.
Tough opener, and then it gets really, really easy. Kennesaw, Miami, Ohio, Indiana is terrible out of a power conference. And then they go to Tulsa and South Florida. So they're playing one team inside of the top 65 in my power ratings. So I expect them to start out 5-1. They have a couple of coin flips at SMU, and then against a pretty good UCF team. It's just a schedule. They play in a conference that has some talent. The schedule, they dodge anyone that could be dangerous other than Central Florida and SMU. So the schedule for me sets up. They should be a double-digit favorite I've got in 8 games of the 12. They're not going to be in the conversation of college football playoff like last season, but they don't have to be. If they're a 9-win, if they're a 9-3 or 10-2 team, we're just fine with that based on their win total. But yeah, it's the schedule just sets up really, really good for Cincinnati. It's a team that Luke Fickell, I have a lot of faith in. The guy's 42-2 straight up as a favorite. He's going to be favored a ton this year. it's just a team that I think will still continue to win. Not at the clip of last season, but there's just not a team on there that I'm really scared of outside of Arkansas.
All right. I'm kind of with I like Arkansas in that game. If you're laying 6.5, I like Arkansas in that game, but that doesn't mean that I don't like Cincinnati with the rest of that cakewalk schedule that's in there. Maybe that's my SEC bias, but things turn easy, even with the guys that Cincinnati lost. All right, that's a lot that we covered, and we probably ran long, so we will cut it here, especially considering that we will have a couple more college football podcasts throughout the summer to throw at you guys, so plenty more information coming. Thank you to our guest, Tyler Wyatt. You can find him on Twitter at BetSmartUS. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Unreasonable Odd. Ran out of room for the S. You guys probably know that by now. You can follow me on Twitter at Julian Edlow. And yeah, keep an eye out for more college football articles on the DK playbook coming your way. And of course, some more podcasts looking into all this stuff. We will be back. I keep teasing this every podcast. We will have a baseball podcast with Steve Buchanan at some point. He does still work here, and he is still a co-host of this podcast. So we will get there in the near future. As Samir mocks Steve and says, "Yeah, right." I'll believe it when I see it too, Samir. Tyler, thank you for coming on. Appreciate the time. Everybody go follow him on Twitter.
Yeah, thanks for having me.